Hi, I'm Susan Casey, and welcome to Rock Your Shine After You've Been Cracked Wide Open. I am thrilled to be bringing this new show on grief and loss and the transformations that can happen when people have gone through a traumatic event. I'm a therapist, a podcaster, and an author, and it is a privilege to be here with all of you today. Today I have two very special guests with me. I'd like to introduce Chris and Rebecca Hewitt, and we will be talking about the death of their son today. Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for coming. I have interviewed you, Becky, before on the podcast a couple of times. And Chris, of course, I know you and I know your story. And I just want to say how grateful I am that you are willing to come here and share your story and just your grief journey and where you are today. So I want to start just very quickly by talking about why you're here. You lost your son, Skylar, from an accidental drug overdose that was laced with fentanyl.
It was fentanyl, yeah.
It was pure fentanyl. And he was, I know we're going to talk a little bit about what brought your son to sober living, because he was at a point in his recovery where you guys could actually feel like you could breathe. And then he had this accidental overdose. So welcome.
Thank you.
And I guess I would like to start with, because I do know enough about Skylar that as a young child, he had some early indicators of anxiety, which led him to using in the first place. So can we just start there, just the first few minutes, just giving us some of that, those early indicators that you saw with your son, that you knew something was going on for him?
Yeah, he was kicked out of 2 or 3 daycares for inappropriate behavior as far as like being aggressive and whatnot, and then it just continued on through his schooling and just...
He had ADD and anxiety, and so he had a bunch of mental health issues, but he was young and they couldn't really diagnose him. Mm-hmm. So he was struggling with those things, and we put him on some medications and took him off of medications. Like, we were trying to find what would work for him because, something was wrong.
How did you know, though? You said, Chris, that he was kicked out of daycare. How old was he? I mean, we're talking
little,
pretty young, right?
When you started 1, 2, 3 years old.
Yep.
And so he would do, then, I mean, not to make a joke, but it does make me smile when I think about a 2-year-old getting kicked out of daycare. It's so ridiculous to me, I can't even stand it. But so he would just jump from daycare to daycare, so you got him through daycare until he started school.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't work that long, so like I was able to, when he was in daycare, it was a short amount of time, like
Gotcha.
3 or 4 days a week, half a day.
Yep.
And then he would be home with you.
And then he was home with me, yeah.
I remember something that you told me, Becky, in an early interview that I still remember was when he was little, you knew he had anxiety because he would actually chew holes through his little shirt.
Yeah.
Which is pretty extreme, right? And when you started seeing him gnawing on his...
I have anxiety, so I know that it manifests in ways like that. And yeah, he would come home with holes chewed in his shirt, and I knew that it was anxiety. That's how it was coming out at that time. And he struggled with it until he died. I mean, I have anxiety, so he gets that. My mother, so it kind of runs in the family, but his was pretty bad. And
so I know that the two of you did everything for your son. You got him the help that he needed. You did early intervention. He continued to show these signs. And Chris, you had talked about, I know that also I think it's important to state that you two got divorced when he was young, and both of you have said to me you felt like that was super traumatic for him. And so I think that and one of the reasons I wanted you on the show is that even though you two divorced, you have stayed, so you had this solidarity in all of the support that you were providing to your son, because you knew it was traumatic for him.
Yeah. Right.
And you even went as far as to try to give your marriage another shot, which I know did not work.
Yeah.
Bring us to the years then, his adolescent years, when you really started to see that things were escalating for him. What was going on?
He was getting, in trouble with, school, getting kicked out of school.
For what? Was he AD? I know he had ADD. Was he getting into fights? Was he blowing school off? What was happening?
Mostly having drugs and having marijuana, and he was caught a few times, shoplifting at like Hannaford
And was he shoplifting to sell?
He was shoplifting.
Mostly alcohol.
He got caught, I think it was cough medicine.
Oh,
okay.
This is in his early teens.
Yep. And he is self-medicating. I want to make sure that we are stating
Yes.
that. I know it may be obvious to a lot of people, but I think that is important. That he was trying to find ways. We often think of drug and alcohol as the problem, but it's often people's solution to whatever is going on for them, to self-medicate or pain or whatever else is happening for them. Mm-hmm. So he was getting in more and more trouble. Then what happened? What were you guys doing to try to figure out what was happening with Skylar at this point?
We were in counseling as a family, and Skylar was going by himself. But we also would go, the three of us would go, not he and I, but
you would go as a
family
right.
to try and help Skylar. And because his mid-teens, we knew he was using Xanax, that was his drug of choice.
And that was off the street? Was he buying it on the street at that point?
Xanax, yep. And which makes sense because he has anxiety that is like self-medicating, and he was any pill. He was using whatever he could get his hands on, and it got really bad by his junior year.
Was he on a prescription before he started buying?
He was, when he was young, he was on Risperidol for behavioral stuff that they just couldn't diagnose really. They weren't sure. He had some manic episodes, but we believe it's because he was on a different medication that was causing that. I really didn't want him on medication, I remember, which is why we had him in counseling all the way through. I think until he went into residential treatment at 17. After he did get kicked out of school his end of his junior year, and he didn't finish. He did get his GED. But he went into residential treatment, and from there it was using, jail, rehab, sober living.
Right, so it was this revolving door, and still the two of you were going to rehab, you were going to visit him in prison, and what was happening between the two of you? Were you having conversations? Were you at your wits' end? What did that, because I want us to transition into what happened. So get us to the sober living. Tell us finally how he was able to get the help that he needed.
He was finally accepted into the sober living house.
In Portland.
In Portland was the first one. He got kicked out of that one because they found alcohol or drugs in his room. He served the mandatory time that they have before you can move back in. You have to prove to them that you're sober, so he had to be drug and alcohol free. They took him back in, and then is that when he moved to Old Orchard, to that sober house?
Are you talking about
The
day
one-
one?
No, the one in Portland.
Oh, well, he went to Milestone a couple times, and so it was back and forth. like he did go to Milestone. I think what you're asking is when he went the very last time before he died.
Well, and I'm also interested in, I don't think I know this part about your story. Was he mandated to go to sober living? Like, how did he get to
No.
that? I want to know that light bulb that went off for your son, because Skylar wanted to get help. He wanted to get off the drugs and the alcohol, and I know that through talking to the two of you. So how did he get, because I know he did his last stint in prison, and then he went right to sober living, right, or no?
Well, he went to work at Mainworks, and they helped him. They got him into a sober living.
Can you tell our listeners what Mainworks is?
Mainworks is a program that helps people, men who, I think, and women, but mostly men that are released from prison from drug-related charges, and when they have no place to live, nothing to start over, Mainworks gives them jobs. They get them housing. They get them rides to their jobs. It's
a remarkable program. I know I've looked at it since talking to the two of you.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot about it. So he wanted to make something of his life. He wanted to put this behind him.
Always.
He ended up going to Mainworks, and that's how he got into the sober living, through Mainworks. Is that how that happened?
He's been in a few of them. And
But I'm talking the last before Skylar died.
okay, that he wasn't in sober living before he went to Milestone and completed the rehab program.
Okay.
Then stayed on the property in a sober living house on the property of that residential treatment.
Okay.
So he wasn't in the sober living very long before he overdosed and died.
So let's go into that, because I think that we know that fentanyl is an epidemic at this point, right? I mean, we know that. You know the stats even better
Yes.
than I do at this point. Why don't you tell us the stats before we talk about just the number of deaths that are happening right now in...
Oh, it's a lot. I mean, I think, God, and I know this, it was like, it was way more than COVID deaths. I mean, last year, it was hundreds of thousands, I believe.
Of deaths from
fentanyl.
And I know that kids are getting fentanyl now laced in gummy pills. I read a story about the gummy bears, pot gummy bears. I mean, because I think that a lot of people think about fentanyl is that it is heroin that's laced with fentanyl, but people are getting it everywhere now. All right, so you guys were in a good place at this point when Skylar was in the sober living after completing the program. You could breathe.
Yeah.
Chris, what happened? Because I know it was you who was trying to get a hold of him, correct?
Yes. So it was after he had freshly moved into the sober living house, and he was out of the, the program. Still living on the property, but out of the program. He had graduated from the program. Even when he was using, and prior to him being in there, if I would call him or text him, he would always get back to me within 20 minutes to a half hour.
And you guys were very, very close, and I want to say that too. You did all of the things together, right? Hunting, fishing, you guys were best friends.
Spent every weekend together.
Yeah.
It was the best time of my life. And this one particular day, I texted him, called him, no response. Hour went by, still nothing. That's when I knew something was wrong, and I texted his mom and said, something's wrong. He hasn't gotten back to me. And
in your heart you knew, didn't you?
Yeah. Yep.
You take if you need to take a minute.
No, that's good. We had the contact number for Jamie, the director of the house that he was living in. I called her, told her what was going on. She said that she had tried getting a hold of him earlier and couldn't either. My sister lives 5 minutes away, so I called her, and pretty much her and Jamie met at the house at the same time, and his door to his bedroom was locked, and Jamie made entry, and that's when she found him.
Sorry, Chris. I know how hard this is for you. Make me cry too.
It's hard. It's gonna make me cry.
I know, it's okay, we can cry. It's a grief and loss show. That's why we're here. So I'm gonna give Chris a minute, and I'm gonna switch to you.
Okay.
So I know that then you were still holding out hope, right? That you were making all the excuses for Chris as to why he could not get a hold of him.
Yeah.
And
Because I had just talked to him like 2 days before that, and like he was so happy, so I just thought he was overreacting. I thought that, he probably lost his phone. He very, very much does that all the time, and so. But he was so panicked, and I panicked, but I still didn't think it was going to be, like he said he knew something was wrong, but I didn't feel that way.
you couldn't, right? You just couldn't go there.
I don't think so.
I didn't want to go there. It was just
You knew.
even when he knew that I would be upset if I could tell he had been,
Not gone.
on something, or if he had been drinking or whatever. He knew I would be upset, but he still always let me know that he was all right. And that one time that he didn't, I knew.
Respond. So there is so much to unpack here, and I know this interview is very short.
And I had been calling him too, and he wasn't answering.
And it wasn't answering
Yeah,
you.
because I was like, call your father back right now. And that was like early, like 11 o'clock in the morning that day. So we had to have been going through that most of the day, which I'm kind of surprised because it feels like it all happened in like an hour.
We often, I've interviewed a lot of people who have lost children and worked with people who have lost children, and I know this is also true for your story, that losing a child, I think everyone can agree, is probably the most horrific thing that can happen to a human being, and it is such a deep fear from the day that child is born. Like, you're like, I just need to keep this child alive, right? And so oftentimes, and I actually have a client now that I'm working with who said, why couldn't, I'm going to cry, why couldn't I keep my kid alive? And I think that what can compound grief and the healing of our deep heartache is what compounds our suffering with these other things that accompany grief and the loss, which is guilt and shame. And I've seen this not only with different I know I felt deep guilt after my brother died, but I really see the complexity of a parent's grief, because I think from the moment that child is born, you as the parent are like, okay, my one job now is to make sure this kid grows up and lives this happy life, right? That's what all parents want for their children. I want to move into, I know after Skylar died, you went through the deep shock, the disbelief, all of the things that happen in when you get a traumatic call like that. And yet both of you have been able to maintain this incredible relationship, and you each have partners, and it's just amazing to me. Because I think that if I could ever say, who are the pinup people of how to deal with loss, it would be the two of you, because many people after a divorce, it does not look like what has happened with the two of you. I want to talk about what you have done, though, because I feel like with this particular story is finding some measure of joy again in how you have dealt with this incredible loss that isn't actually that. It's been 2 years? Has it been? Is it going to be 3 years in February?
Yep.
3 years. Super fresh still.
It always will be, I think.
Yes. I want to start with you, Becky, and then we'll move to Chris, because I am just going to say that when I interviewed you initially, one thing that really took my breath away was the way that you showed grief with your child's ashes, that you slept with his ashes, and it's just, I know. And that you were able to see some of that progress that you stopped sleeping with his ashes. And for me, that is just such a poignant, I know.
Yeah. I don't really think about that much now, you know.
But for me, when you were telling me the story,
feeling of like that was non-acceptance. That was I'm going to sleep with my son's ashes because I just couldn't deal with him being gone.
Right. Chris, what about you? What did early grief look like for you?
Well, I, to this day, still have not been able to open his box of ashes, but my wife is, taken over that role for me.
And she put them in little urns.
Yes,
I know part of this story.
I have a little urn that I take with me camping and fishing and out on the boat, and I've released some of his ashes out on the ocean.
Yeah, we did that together, actually.
Yeah.
And I bring this up because I think all of us, sometimes grief is so dense and so terrifying that you think you're never going to feel better. That is these tiny little indicators of how do I know I'm making these baby steps forward to reintegrate into life again, right? Because the last thing you want, it's very slow. It's like moving the Titanic.
Yes.
But I know both of you have made this incredible progress, and I want listeners to get that. I want them to hear that, because the darkness can feel so hopeless. Can you talk to us what each of you have done specifically? I know each of you have done some counseling. What else have you done to try to integrate the death of your son? You have started taking him with you places, which I know was a huge, huge milestone for you.
Yes. It's been about 1.5 years before I could do that. But, I've also talked to a grief counselor and gotten the tools that I need to, move on and grieve.
What's one tool that you feel like has been helpful, if you can recall?
Well, typically I don't just all of a sudden driving down the road and cry for no reason, but, since I've been given that tool, it's actually happened a few times, and
giving yourself the space to actually feel the
I'll
loss.
just think about him more. Like if I'm driving up to camp hunting or something like that, I'll either talk to him or I'll cry thinking about the times that we've had up there. Good times.
I'm glad that you've given yourself that space.
But it was very helpful getting counseling. Wasn't easy for me. Took me about 1 year or so to finally reach out, but definitely worked.
Good. Becky, I know that you've done some pretty cool things too. We've got just a few minutes left. Tell us what I know the big thing that you've done, and I want you to talk about that and how you're really transforming this grief into helping others.
I think, for me, after the first year, I didn't want to get help, and then I decided to get help. After the year point, and that really made a huge difference for me, writing things out and feeling my feelings, because I was kind of not doing that either as much, and it made a huge difference. And I knew I wanted to do something to honor Skylar, and he always wanted to help people, and so I decided to get my grief and loss coaching certification and help other parents who have lost a child, or help anyone suffering with grief and loss. And that's been really healing for me. I feel like Skylar's with me on that. I'm living my life for both of us now, and I just want to make it as, good for both of us as I can. And I just feel like I have an acceptance that I didn't have before.
And that can take time.
Yeah, and I think it's really been not that long since, and I've thought about it a lot lately, like the acceptance that he's gone and that I want to move on with my life, that I don't want to die too. I want to live for both of us and do things to help other people and make the most out of this life.
And it really does become about integrating the loss into life, doesn't it? I mean, you and I talk about this, that you think about grief as growing around it.
Yeah.
I think about things that bloom in the space that that are, that our loved ones have left behind. I want to give you guys the last word, though. For parents who are out there struggling, or anybody, is there anything that you would like to say that I haven't asked you?
I know the guilt that both of us have had. I think, any parent who loses a child, no matter what the circumstances are, there's guilt involved. But when our child had substance use disorder, struggled with that for 10 years, and of course, we go back and forth thinking, what could I have done anything to prevent this tragedy?
Yes.
And I feel like that's a huge part of, grieving, is that guilt. And, I just want to say that, will always carry some guilt. I think that's just a normal thing, but that I think we as parents, we did the best we could with what we had and what we knew, and we did everything we could to keep him alive and save him.
I have never heard a story of parents doing more, I can tell you that, and you can imagine I've heard a lot of stories in my lifetime in this work. You guys, like I said, you're sort of the poster parents as far as I'm concerned of what you did for Skylar.
We were very close to him, so we went and saw him in jail, we were with him a lot. So, and so we just did it together because I think we needed to support each other just to get through it,
It's incredible.
It was hard, yeah.
Chris, do you have anything you'd like to say to grieving parents?
I would just like to say that anybody who is in our position and has lost a child or a loved one to what we've lost them to, reach out to somebody to get help, because it's nothing that you can go through on your own.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here.